Hey everyone! At this point, I've done a bunch of videos where we analyze different aspects of the game Terraforming Mars based on our big data sets. And we've looked at different cards such as corporations and preludes and project cards and how good they are according to different metrics. But up until now, I've mostly looked at these cards in isolation, as in how good they are over a large sample size on average. But of course, Terraforming Mars, more than anything else, is a game of synergies. And your opening hand is more than just one card. So, for instance, a corporation like Phobolog, which is one of the worst in the game, can actually be really good with the right starting hand because of synergies. If you have good titanium targets, for instance, and for instance, a prelude like self-sufficient settlement is one of the worst preludes in the game, but in the hands of Tharsis Republic, it becomes one of the best. So today I wanted to explore synergies between corporations and preludes, and I've recently made an addition to the preludes page on my website where you can now actually filter for a bunch of different things. And one of the things you can filter for is corporation here. So if I change this to, for instance, Mining Guild, now you can see that the list of the best preludes changes quite a bit. And I'll go through, I won't show all of the numbers because then this video will take forever, but I'll go through each corporation and just based on the data that I've analyzed, I'm going to try to give you some highlights and some conclusions on what I think are practical advice that we can draw from the data that we have here. Okay, so just like last time, I'm going to go through the corporations alphabetically, starting with Chongqing Mars. And this is the format I'll be using. So for each corporation, I will describe basically what it wants from its preludes and what it doesn't want. And I'll also highlight that by including some of the preludes that are not necessarily at the absolute top, but maybe the most improved, and the preludes that illustrate the synergies best. And on the bottom, we have preludes that become a lot worse with this corporation. So for starting with CSM, this is one of the more difficult corps to actually do this for because it's a relatively well-rounded corporation, which is quite flexible. So you won't see the extreme differences in prelude strength that you'll see from some other corps. But in general, CSM has a discount on building tags that it wants to utilize. So it rather wants to go for a steel economy with steel and energy production to be able to spend that steel on cards that need energy production, rather than a titanium economy where it doesn't really have any advantage such as its effect. But again, like I said, prelude evaluations don't really change that much for CSM, but something like supplier becomes a lot better in the hands of CSM, and also smelting plant, because get some steel it can use to pay for building tags that are already discounted. Moving over to Credicor, I think this is one that probably a lot of players get wrong, even strong players, because with Credicor, this is also, by the way, a flexible corporation which has so much money that you can go both in an engine direction and in more of a terraforming direction. But in many situations, especially on the Tharsis map, players love to go for a rush with Credicor because you can SP cities and greeneries so cheaply and just dominate the ground game. And because of that, I think a lot of players think, okay, I'm trying to dominate the ground game, so I'd like to have preludes that also play to the ground, such as experimental forest and self-sufficient settlement. But no, you don't want those. Like, you certainly don't want a city prelude. Those are already some of the worst preludes in the game, and with Credicor, you already have a discount on cities, so a city is just not, very very important to you, and that you'd rather spend your prelude on something else. And perhaps more surprisingly, experimental forest, which is often considered one of the best preludes in the game, it's just not very good as Credicor. It's actually closer towards the bottom. And again, I think this comes back to the fact that Credicor can cheaply get greeneries. So for instance, Experimental Forest can be really good in the early fight for Gardener on Tharsis, but I mean Credicor, you can just SP3 greeneries if you want, and then you have a Gardener, or maybe SP2 of them and convert for the third one typically. So I think this would surprise a lot of people to see just how poorly Experimental Forest performs in the hands of Credicor. So what do you want as Credicor? Well, you want development. So you're starting with a lot of cash, but like once you've spent that cash and there's nothing left, you ideally want to have some economic development so you can continue to basically make expensive plays, because that is what Credicor wants. The only way you can use your effect is to make plays that cost 20 MC or more. So Business Empire, Metals Company, stuff like that, they give you economic development that will help you in the long run to continue playing expensive cards and making expensive standard projects. Business Empire in particular gives you a ton of production. It also means you have to pay 6 MC for that prelude, but for Credicor with 57 MC, that's not a problem. So it's just very strong. Ecoline is one of the most specialized corporations in the base game, and that has a big effect on its synergies with preludes as well. I think one common mistake players make with Ecoline is that they assume that even more plant production is good for Ecoline, because, you know, plants are more valuable since you only need 7 to convert to greenery. But that is not so much the case. So preludes like biosphere support and biofuels that give you even more plant prod, and that are, you know, pretty bad preludes to begin with, they're still just as bad with Ecoline, maybe even worse. Like, yeah, you get a lot of plant production, but that is not your problem with Ecoline. You get enough plant production usually to dominate the ground game. What you need is to terraform the other global parameters, namely temperature and oceans, so that you can play a short game and win a rush. So Huge Asteroid, I think Huge Asteroid is often mistakenly evaluated as one of the better preludes, which is, according to my data, is just not. It's just generically one of the worst preludes in the game, or like at least in the bottom half. But with Ecoline, it becomes, just immediately jumps almost towards the top. So you get 3 temperature bumps, bringing you closer to the end of the game, and that is just very good. So solving the temperature track is usually Ecoline's biggest obstacle on its way to a rush win. Great Aquifer, another one. You get 2 oceans. 2 oceans already taken care of. Furthermore, you can use that to get, maybe 4 plants and maybe get an early conversion between those 2 oceans. I mean, if you're playing on Tharsis, you just use Great Aquifer, and then if you're first player, you just get an instant greenery. So that's really good. Other than that, I've seen a pattern where Ecoline loves titanium preludes, such as Orbital Construction Yard and Acquired Space Agency, and especially ASA. Can draw you some space events, and in addition you get 18 MC worth of titanium. So if you happen to find something like Big Asteroid or GIA or any of the big space events, that's going to be huge. Those are some of the best cards, for maybe the best cards for Ecoline, Demos down and so on. So that's why that prelude gets a big buff with Ecoline. So what do you not want? You don't want cards. I mean, that's not entirely true, because every corporation wants cards as such. But with Biolab and Research Network, you're sacrificing so much development just to get 3 cards, because these preludes just don't provide much development. And you're so poor as Ecoline that you can't really afford to spend an entire prelude just on drawing cards. And you usually don't need that many cards to win as Ecoline. If you're rushing, you only need like a few space events and ways to maybe consistently maybe get some heat production and some oceans, maybe an aquifer pumping or something. You don't need that many cards. So these just go totally against the corporation. And there are among some of the worst preludes for Ecoline. Helion is another one where I think when people see these heat production preludes, they just see, Helion, heat, ding, 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 that's gotta be good. But it's not that good. I mean, Mohole and Mohole Excavation are both some of the worst preludes in the game. They get a little bit better with Helion, but it's still nowhere close to being the best. So like, even if you have Helion, you'd much rather have a good prelude like Great Aquifer or UNMI Contractor or Smelting Plant or whatever. Any good prelude, Business Empire, rather than these two. So the reason I'm showing them here is just because they become maybe like average or maybe slightly below average with Helion, and that is at least better than it is for most other corporations. So what do you not want? You don't want cities. Helion doesn't have the same dominance over the ground games such as Ecoline and Tharsis Republic and some others. So you're dominating the temperature track basically. So your strength is not necessarily on the ground. So, I mean, I should say again that the city preludes are pretty bad and generically, but seems to be even worse with Helion. Helion is a pretty bad corporation typically. Interplanetary Cinematics is an interesting one, and this is one that I think illustrates quite clearly what I'm trying to show in this video. The fact that synergies between corporations and preludes aren't necessarily what you would immediately assume. So Interplanetary Cinematics is a steel corporation. That doesn't mean you want more steel, because you already have enough steel. So for instance, Martian Industries is like incredibly bad as IC. You already have 20 steel. You don't need more. It was already bad to begin with. It becomes a lot even worse. Smelting plant, which is usually quite good, becomes actually bad with IC because you have 20 steel. You don't need 25. On the other hand, what do you need when you have all this steel? Well, you need power to play these power-hungry steel cards. So power generation becomes a lot better for IC. What other things you need? You need money, because you're like the main drawback of this corporation is you're starting with 30 MCs. You're really poor apart from the steel, so you need more MC. So something like Allied Bank, and Allied Bank probably a little bit better than Business Empire in the hands of IC, because Business Empire subtracts 6 MC from your starting cash, and that can be kind of painful for IC, which already starts with so little. So Allied Bank giving you that extra free MC can be important. Inventrix is a corporation where, for whatever reason, I always end up looking back at the corp and I have to ask myself, did I really start with 45 MC? Because it feels like you started with like 25 MC, because you're always so poor as Inventrix. You end up keeping too many cards and you can't afford to play them. You're drawing 3 cards, so for instance, something like the Biolab, which can be tempting as Inventrix, like you draw 3 more cards, you get another science tag, you have a ton of cards, just not very good. So what you need with Inventrix is economic development. So something like Business Empire or Metals Company that will boost your income is going to be great, because then you're not that poor. So what you don't want to lose MC at the beginning. So huge asteroid, while it does provide some development, you lose some cash there. So you could say, okay, it's the same for Business Empire, but Business Empire immediately pays itself back in Gen 2, and then starting from Gen 3, you're going well into the positive, whereas huge asteroid has a longer payback time. So IO Research Outpost is one that I see many Inventrix players pick, because it's really tempting. You have a science tag, maybe you have a science payoff, you want one more science tag. this is where you get into trouble because IO Research Outpost doesn't provide much development at all. So let's say you're Inventrix, you have AGT in your hand. You want to get AGT online as soon as possible. So you pick IO Research Outpost and Biolab, 2 science tags, and draw some more cards. You can help you pay for AGT. Now you have a million cards in your hand, and you can't afford to play them. And maybe you're tempted to go for the planner milestone. And in my milestones and awards video, we saw how bad that is for Inventrix when they go for planner because of this typical problem. So yeah, you want economic development, and you don't want to lose MC early on. That's the gist of it. Mining Guild is another highly specialized corporation that really illustrates the concept of synergies between the corp and the preludes. Because obviously Mining Guild wants to place tiles to boost its steel production. So any prelude with a tile on it, whether that's experimental forests, aquifer turbines, or great aquifer, self-sufficient settlement, early settlement, all of them are great for Mining Guild. At the start of the game, there's always going to be some mineral tiles available, unless you're second player, of course, and someone just snipes the ocean spots away from you. But aside from that, you want early tiles. It's pretty simple. You don't want heat production, so these 2 bad preludes here, Mohole and Mohole Excavations, are just completely useless most of the time for Mining Guild. Mohole Excavation is even worse because it provides steel production. So again, like you're going to get a ton of steel production, so you don't want a prelude that gives you even more steel production. And this is where this concept comes back, where you want the things that you don't have. So what do you have as Mining Guild? You have steel production. What do you don't have? You don't have MC. So for instance, preludes to give you more MC would be nice, but they're just not as good as the tiles, because the tiles give you additional steel production and it's just really powerful. So yeah, this one is a really obvious synergy. Phobolog is a fun one. You'd think with the alloy titanium that Phobolog wants more titanium production and maybe acquired space agency. And while that can be good, what it wants even more is just like cash. So a prelude as bad as Lone, one of the worst preludes, becomes actually one of the best for Phobolog. Yes, the -2 MC production is pretty bad, but you're so strapped for cash in the opening as Phobolog that you can hardly play anything apart from the space cards. So if you get some cash infusion to be able to play some actual cards, and if you, in addition to that, have some, titanium targets that can, like space events that you can use to get development, then low can actually be pretty good. Just nitrogen shipment is also usually a pretty bad prelude. Certainly in the bottom half of the list, but as Phobolog, it's all right. I mean, you get 5 MC, you get some TR and so on, so it's not that bad. So what you don't want as Phobolog? Well, you don't want cities and plant production, because while that can be nice and all, it just doesn't provide much, instant development in terms of economy and money and so on. And this is a corporation that doesn't really play that well on the board a lot of the time. So you want to be playing space cards. Obviously, that can be space events, but it can also be Jovians and stuff like that. So something like IO Research Outpost is not that bad for Phobolog, even though it doesn't provide that much development. Maybe it can play to a Jovian strategy. But yeah, it's apart from that, it's hard to draw too many conclusions because Phobolog is one of the least played corporations, and it's also just generally pretty bad. So, but I think there's a clear pattern where it wants to have some immediate cash at the start of the game. Okay, Point Luna. So we already declared this as the best corporation in the game in a vacuum. It obviously gets even better when it gets Earth tags, and this is just like blindly obvious. Point Luna draws cards from Earth tags. That's a really powerful ability. So preludes like Allied Banks, Business Empire, and UNMI Contractor, already three of the top preludes in the game, and UNMI Contractor, being the best overall. These just become absolutely insane in the hands of Point Luna. So here you have the best corporation in a vacuum, and you have the three of the best preludes in a vacuum. When you combine that, it just becomes, a monstrosity. You just hate seeing that if you're playing like on BGA in an arena, and you have a lower ranked opponent and they whip out the Point Luna with the Allied Banks and the Business Empire. That's a classic. You just never want to see that. That's rough. It's really good if you have it yourself. What do you not want as Point Luna? Well, kind of the same thing where you don't want to really be playing on the board, especially in the early game. This is an engine corporation, so you want to be scoring points with cards more than on the board. So dome farming and early settlement don't really fit with that. Dome farming can be a pretty decent prelude for other corporations, just not for Point Luna. And just to show that I'm not just talking out of my ass here, so here we have the actual numbers for Point Luna. So you can see here, like Allied Banks on top, an average ELO gain of 2.15. So that's just insanely good. That's like, imagine you play Earth Catapult Gen 1. In a vacuum, that's equivalent to maybe 1.5, almost 2 ELO points gained on average. So having Allied Banks as Point Luna is like more powerful than playing Earth Catapult on average in the opening. It's just super powerful. Same with, Business Empire, UNMI Contractor. If we flip the list, early settlement, minus 1.78. All of a sudden, this combination scores as bad as a corporation like Thorgate or Phobolog or even UNMI. So that just shows there's actually a huge difference in the preludes you pick. If you have some of these like city preludes, let's say I have both city preludes as Point Luna, that's not a good start at all. Whereas if you have two Earth preludes, it's just bonkers. Okay, Robinson Industries. This one is, very clear. There's a very clear pattern here where you want MC production, because having MC production will allow you to use your ability to boost titanium, plant, and steel production. That are more valuable. While if you don't have MC production, then in the worst case, you have to spend your ability to raise MC production, which is not as valuable, and this just is really bad. On the other hand, preludes that provide, the more expensive production resources like titanium and plant are just not very good. So Galilean mining is just like an absolute disaster for Robinson Industries, because if you're setting your production line up correctly as Robinson, you can raise your titanium production twice with your ability, and that's going to cost you 8 MC total. Whereas with Galilean mining, you're paying the opportunity cost of entire preludes as well as 5 MC. You have to pay for this one just to get 2 titanium production. So it's just horrible for Robinson. You should never play this prelude as Robinson unless you are absolutely forced to do so. Nitrogen shipment provides plant production, which again is just like useless for Robinson. You can pay 4 MC to get that, and plant production is priced a lot higher in this game, so just the raw value you're getting from nitrogen shipment is not going to be worth it when you can just pay 4 MC to get plant production. So once you start to see these patterns, it's pretty obvious what preludes are good and bad for Robinson. Heat preludes can be decent, like Polar Industries, and I had a recent game review where this was the case. I think I had Business Empire and Polar Industries. Because heat is not that valuable either, so you'd rather not spend your action on that, so that can be good. Energy less so. But yeah, I think once you see the pattern here, it's pretty clear. Saturn Systems, again, is super obvious. You get MC production for every Jovian tag, so naturally every prelude with a Jovian tag, I mean, basically only these two, IO Research Outpost and Galilean Mining, become better because you also get MC production. Galilean mining you could think of as sort of asteroid mining, because the only difference is instead of just getting to titanium production, in addition you get one MC production in exchange for having to pay 5 MC, and that's not a bad deal at the start of the game. So you can think of this almost as like asteroid mining, which is a card that costs 30 plus 3 MC. So that sounds pretty good, but in actual reality, even though I've put these Jove preludes up here, they're pretty bad to begin with. So even in the hands of Saturn Systems, they're not that good. Like Galilean mining goes from being pretty bad or really bad to kind of average, whereas IO Research Outpost is usually not that bad. So that one goes from being average to maybe above average, but still not the best. So even as Saturn Systems, you'd rather have UNMI Contractor, Business Empire, just like the generically best preludes, rather than these two, but they do become a lot better. What do you not want? You don't want steel production and energy production, and this is kind of an interesting pattern because there are different types of economies in this game. So one type of economy is the steel economy, where you have a ton of steel and you want power to play those steel cards, and that's what we see with Mining Guild, with Interplanetary Cinematics. And then you have the other type of economy, which is the titanium economy, where you want space cards. You're getting space discounts and stuff like that, and it just doesn't fit very well with these steel and power preludes in general. Not to say that mining operations is bad, because it is one of the best preludes in the game, but it becomes slightly worse. I mean, probably a lot worse as Saturn. Same with power generation. Teractor is a fun one, because if you look at it, it's not really that obvious what you want, because all this corporation really does is give you a lot of cash at the start. You have an effect that is pretty weak. You get a rebate for playing Earth tags. So what does that mean for your choice of prelude? Well, it means you certainly don't need more money. So something like Loan, which we saw was actually one of the better preludes for Phobolog, actually one of the best, is just horrible for Teractor. You're starting with 60 MC, you don't need 90 MC. Like with 9, you probably can't even pick an opening hand that costs that much. So yeah, that's just bad. What this corporation excels at is playing expensive cards. So if you have expensive cards in your opening, such as IO Mining Industries, or maybe a giant ice asteroid or something like that, Teractor can easily afford those cards. So we can see that preludes such as Acquired Space Agency that may allow you to draw additional space events, or maybe get you titanium to pay for the big space events you already have in your hand, that can be good. And Eccentric Sponsor, because if you want to be playing expensive cards anyway, then just getting 25 MC back is really good. So these play to the strength of Teractor of being able to play expensive cards. But other than that, it's just like, it's a corporation that doesn't do much. So yeah, it's kind of the opposite of Phobolog. You don't need that early cash infusion at all. Tharsis Republic might be the most extreme case of flipping the evaluation of preludes on its head, because I mentioned a bunch of times now how these city preludes are among the weakest. But in the hands of Tharsis Republic, they immediately jump towards the top. Early Settlement and Self-Sufficient Settlement are both in the top 5 performing preludes for Tharsis Republic. And they're usually overall, they're in the bottom 5 or thereabouts. And it's just an obvious synergy. You get MC production and some cash. So if you look at Self-Sufficient Settlement, you get 3 MC production and 3 MC. That's almost as good as Allied Banks. And in addition to that, you get a city. So that's just really good. Um, you don't want these Jovian tags or titanium production necessarily. So the Jovian strategies would usually be a trap for Tharsis. I think a trap that many beginners make, because there are just two things that like beginners love in the game of Terraforming Mars. That's playing cities and also going for the Jovian strategy. So when you do try to do both with Tharsis Republic, it's usually not a good idea. And we talked about the difference between the steel economy and the titanium economy. So Tharsis Republic is definitely a corporation that rather would like to play a steel economy, because that will allow you to place more cities and just generally get cards that are good for this corp. So, you know, the milestones you can get on Tharsis, for instance, would be Mayor and Builder. And you achieve those typically from a steel economy, not from a titanium economy. Thorgate is another really good example of the concept that you don't want more of what you already have. So Thorgate has only one advantage, and that's being able to get cheap power, cheap energy production. So why would you need power generation or Oxford turbines? Because you don't actually get the free MC rebate when you play these preludes. So because the effect is that you pay 3MC less for it, but you're not paying for these preludes. So you have no advantage when playing these preludes, and you're just getting energy production that you can easily get anyway. So you're just wasting the prelude basically. So this is just really, really, really bad to be playing, especially power generation as Thorgate. It can be tempting sometimes, and I understand, like, you're going for the absolute meme setup where you have a gazillion energy production and power grid and stuff like that, but it's usually just not very good. So in my experience, the way you play Thorgate is that you mostly ignore the effect, because the effect is just not very good, and you would just treat it as a corporation that has an okay amount of starting cash and an energy prod, and that's it. And then because I see when players try to force using the effect to play a bunch of mediocre energy cards, just doesn't really work out well most of the time. So what you want here is just, you want your good preludes. Like, as I said, their corporation doesn't really do much. So you just want generically good preludes, such as UNMI Contractor being the best one, but you know, any good prelude will do. Okay, speaking of UNMI, we have the corporation UNMI, and this one obviously wants TR to be able to use the action. It's actually very important that you're able to use the action from the first generation, and usually you want to get that first TR from a prelude. You want to make sure that you get that. So, you know, its namesake, UNMI Contractor, it's pretty good. Polar Industries, you get one TR, you get some heat production, and you can use to get more TR later on. That's really good. But like, you want to make sure, like I said, that at least one of your preludes has some TR on it. You don't want these card preludes that don't provide any sort of development, or even the city, which is just like, these are just too slow. You need an explosive start where you just continuously terraform your way to an early victory. And BioLab and Research Network just doesn't do that. You're not starting with much cash either, so you can't really afford to waste the prelude on drawing cards. But yeah, you want terraforming, and that's it. Valley Trust is interesting because there are basically two main patterns here. You either want like an explosive start with lots of terraforming, maybe Great Aquifer to get an early conversion between the oceans and get a lot of plants, or maybe supply drop, which will allow you to pay for some expensive opening cards and get some plants so you can get a conversion again, stuff like that. Either that, or you want science and card draw. So Valley Trust is infamously a flexible corporation that can either go in a terraforming direction or in an engine direction. You can utilize the free preludes to get an explosive start and go for a rush, or you can utilize your science discount and get some cards and go for big science payoffs in an engine strategy. So with this flexibility, there aren't that many preludes that become bad, apart from the ones that are already bad to begin with. So stuff like biofuels and biosphere support, these are just bad preludes for basically any corporation. And as I mentioned, even for Ecoline, these are pretty bad. Like unless specifically biosphere support will enable an like Gen 2 NRA or something, it's just super bad. So there's no real pattern of preludes that are good to begin with that become bad in the hands of Value Trust, again, because it is so flexible. Our last corporation in the alphabet is Vitor. And Vitor, more than any other corporation, wants cards. It has this really powerful effect where you can get a 3MC discount for playing cards with victory points. And there are a lot of cards with victory points on them. What Vitor needs to win the game is usually a long game that goes on for, ideally 11 generations or more, where it can play a ton of cards and score a ton of points, victory points on cards. In order to do that, you need lots of cards, and that's what Research Network and Biolab provides. Vitor doesn't want early terraforming, such as huge asteroids. So a huge asteroid will usually speed up the game, shorten the game. That's really bad for Vitor. So that's just one of the worst preludes actually for Vitor. Experimental forest, which is normally quite good, becomes, again, pretty bad. Not the absolute worst, but surprisingly bad. And in general, Vitor wants to hold back on terraforming the global parameters. If we just take a look here at the actual numbers, so I think this would surprise some people that, we see Biolabs in the number 2 spots and then Research Network number 4 spot. Usually you think of these as not that powerful preludes, but they're just really, really good with Vitor. Metals Company is actually on top, development to pay for all these cards. If you go down to the bottom, Biosphere supports is actually even worse than Society support, although the sample size of players that played Society support along with Vitor is really low, so there's that. But you look at the games where Biosphere support was picked, there's like more than a -3 ELO loss on average, and that's just super bad. That's just extremely bad. I think that's one of the worst numbers we've seen today. And even early settlement, it's a bad prelude, but is it really that bad? It was -3. And huge asteroid, it's a lot better, like -1.4, but that's still super bad for. So huge asteroid, you think of it as this good prelude, but it's actually no, it's the third worst for Vitor. So thought that was interesting. Just rounding it off with Vitor to just illustrate how different the evaluations of preludes can be depending on your corporations. And of course, you pick more than one prelude at the start of the game. I haven't looked into numbers for combinations of corporation and 2 preludes, just because even though we have almost 100,000 games now of data, we just don't have enough data yet to look at that granular type of information yet. I've also started experimenting a little bit with, trying to model, trying to make a machine learning model basically that tries to estimate the strength of different opening hands, like different opening picks depending on a hand. That's just very much in the early stages right now. We probably need more data for that as well. But there are lots of these cool things we can do when we have so much data and more data to come. So hope you stay tuned for more analysis in the future, and hope you enjoyed it, and have a nice day.